When you work in Excel spreadsheets, you may realize that from time to time you've got a really large spreadsheet and you have some sort of information that you would like to have repeated on each printed page. So it might be something like the date that the spreadsheet was created or the date that it's printed. You might want a page number or a picture of some kind, maybe a company logo or a company name, maybe even the path of how to find that particular workbook. So what you can do, of course, is to create headers and footers in Excel. Now, in Excel, we have something else. We also need to know about page layout view so that we can even see those headers and footers. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library. And let's look at Excel's headers and footers and all the things that we can do with them. When we look at our spreadsheet and we decide that maybe we would like to print it, there are some things that are somewhat noticeably missing. And unlike Word, where I can simply go to where I think the header or footer is and just double click, I'm not able to do that with Excel. So how can I add in, say, the workbook name or a page number or a date and not have it encroach upon the spreadsheet that I have created? And certainly, if I wanted to repeat on each page, and maybe instead of 14 days, maybe I want to put in a whole quarter or a half a year's worth of information, so I would definitely have more than one page. How can I add in those headers and footers? Well, what we could do is kind of unique to Excel. What we do is we go up to the tabs above the ribbon, and as I go almost to the end here on the right, there is a View tab. And when I click on View, it shows me that what we are seeing now is the normal view. It's sort of the traditional classic view, and any of these other views have been added as people have used Excel, but certainly normal view has been there from the beginning. So with normal view, we can certainly see column headings and row headings and the different grid lines for the different cells. But beyond that, it's a really basic view. If we want to add in headers and footers so that we can add in those page numbers, what we need to do is go to the workbook views and go to the right of normal and click on page layout. And when we click on page layout, it's kind of intriguing that this is the view that if you use Word, this is probably the view that you use 99% of the time for Word. But let's look at this a little more closely in Excel, and we can see that we still have the column letters, although there's more separation between them and the sheet that I'm working on. I also have the row numbers, but again, there's more separation between them and the actual sheet, because with page layout, we actually see that 8.5 by 11 sheet. We see the margins, we see the edges of the paper. Let's scroll down a little bit just to see how that looks. So as I scroll down, I can see everything that I can see with normal view, except that as I get to the bottom of this sheet, well, first of all, I can see it says add footer, but I can not only see the end of this sheet, but I can see the beginning of the next sheet if I'm going to print down the page. If my spreadsheet goes wide instead, you'll notice that I also have kind of grayed out, but I have the hint of the sheet that goes to the right to print the width of the spreadsheet as well. It's very different in how it looks from the page layout view in Word. Well, as I hover my mouse over where it says add footer, you'll see that there are 3 sections. So I have a left and a middle and a right section within that footer. And if I come back up to the top of the page and I hover my mouse over the header, it also has traditionally 3 sections, a left and a middle and a right section just at the top of the page. Now, what happens when I click in that header is kind of interesting. It even tells me now that I have a header, but what happens, just like with a lot of other elements within Microsoft products, is that as I go up above the ribbon and to the right of what we could say is sort of the regular set of tabs, I now have a contextual tab that's called Header and Footer. And when I click on that, it brings up all sorts of buttons that are only there for the header and the footer. Well, let's look at this just a little bit. As I look at this ribbon, starting on the left, we have a header and footer group, and it only has 2 buttons, which are either header or footer. And then we have header and footer elements, and these are individual items that I could add to the header and footer. Of note, though, if I put in a header and footer element, because I'm putting those in manually, what could happen is this. I might decide to then come over to header and footer in that header and footer group and select one of those choices that are in a drop-down. For example, let's go to footer. And you see all these different choices. The thing is, this left group of header and footer is pre-programmed, and it will put things where it's been told to put them. So it's possible that if you go to header and footer elements first, and then you go to header and footer group, that the group on the left will overwrite what you have just done with these different choices here in the elements group. So I'm always going to recommend that if you decide that you want to put in some of these things, start on the left with header and footer, and then add the separate little elements that you want to add in second, so you're not overwriting the different pieces of the header and footer. To the right of that, you have a navigation group, and then to the right of that, we have our options group that has 4 choices of other things that you might want to add to either the header or the footer. I'm going to click where it says Add Headers so that I have the possibility of seeing the header and footer contextual tab. And then let's look at the possibilities here for the header and footer group. Starting on the left with header, and I click on the drop down, I can see that I can add in page numbers, I can add in sheet names, I can add in the workbook name, and just sort of combinations of other kinds of things if that is what I want to do. It even has my name if I want to put in prepared by, for example. Well, I might decide to do one of these. Let's see, I think I'm just going to go with the workbook name and click on it. And there's a little bit of a delay here, but you can see that I now have that workbook name centered in the header. Now, I didn't necessarily choose that centering position. If, for example, I decide that I want to put the workbook name here on the left instead, so I say, well, let's go to header and footer, go to header, and we had that workbook name, so let's just click on it. Yep, no, it won't go to the left because remember that first group is pre-programmed, and part of that pre-programming is the formatting. Which one of these sections is it going to go into? Well, we can live with it in the center here. Now, the other thing that we may find sort of intriguing is I've clicked in that center section where we have the workbook name, and when I did that, it also brought up the kind of coding that is behind that information. And in this case, we have square brackets and file, which means put the file name here. Well, let's go back to header and footer. And let's also look at footer. And we have essentially the same kind of options, but I kind of like this one here where it says confidential and it has the date and a page number. But notice this, it says confidential, comma, and then the date, comma, and then page 1. What this means is confidential will be in the left-hand side of the page. The comma then moves over to the center section, and then the other comma means, okay, now let's go to the right section of that footer. So when I click on this, there we are with the left, center, and right sections of the footer. Notice that part of that pre-programming was that confidential is left aligned, the date here is centered, and the page number is right aligned within its box. So there's quite a bit of detail that goes into that left section of header and footer. I've removed our header and footer as they were so that we could get in a little more practice. So I'm going to click on the header again, and then I'm going to go to the header and footer contextual tab. And let's look at the header and footer elements and just put some of these in. So, gosh, page number, I always like that at the bottom right. So I'm going to go down to the footer actually. And I'm going to scroll down. Okay, and I always like it in the lower right, just personal preference. And I'm going to say page number. And then I'm even going to type of, and I'm going to put number of pages. And so now I have two of those elements kind of side by side with something that I have typed in as a literal. And then I could put in the current date. Let's put this over here with a space, and then we could put in the current time, for example. I may decide to change that a little bit. Let's put in the file name, but let's put it in the header. So to go from the header to the footer, one of the easiest ways is to go to this middle group, navigation, where it says go to header. And it's a lot easier than trying to scroll up and down. So let's go with file name. And see, it just says and file, no problem. And we might even put sheet name in front of that. So what I'm going to do is say sheet name space of space. Now I might, because I don't really have my company name, and let's say it's a company of some kind, I could even say Acme Company here. In the header, I can certainly put in literal values as well. Now one caution is that you'll notice that because I put in the sheet name and the file name together, that took up a lot of space. The file path may be bigger than you anticipate or would want to use. So just kind of keep that in mind as you go through. Here are a couple of things that we do want to remember. I'm just going to click in the header again so that I can get back to my header and footer contextual tab. And remember how we said that the left-hand group of header and footer may accidentally overwrite the middle group here of header and footer elements. Well, let's in fact look at that. So we know that we have the sheet name, the workbook name, and we even have our company name that we've typed in. Let's go back to that header option. And remember how we put in the name of the workbook and how it's centered when we were first looking at that group? Let's click on that. And it's a little bit of a pause, but look at what happened there. We have nothing in the left-hand section now. We only have the name of the workbook in that middle section because this takes precedence over the elements group. Something else that I would like to caution about, so let me click back in the header and footer contextual tab and just go to the footer. And I'm going to click over here in the lower left of the footer because it says that we can add in a picture. And it seems like that would be a fairly easy thing to do. But watch what happens. I'm just going to add in, gosh, it's the fall, so I'm going to say leaves. And I'll just pick that and click insert. And we'll wait, and it says and picture. And the picture has now become a background for the entire page. So you'll want to be careful when you insert pictures and where you place it, because it can become just the background of the whole thing. I have reset our example here so that we yet again have the sheet tab name and the workbook name, and then in the center section we have the company name. And you'll notice a couple of things. First is when I click on this header, the name, the combination really of the sheet and the workbook is going right into that center section. It's not hiding the word example. It's not adjusting and putting example on a different line. And so you need to be aware of what happens with your headers and footers and make sure that a long name in one section doesn't start bumping into the next section's information. I suspect that's why a lot of times you will see header and footer information on the left section and in the right section, but not so much in the middle. You'll also notice that even though I have set up a header and a footer, on the right-hand side where that spreadsheet might spread across, there's nothing there. Well, here's what's interesting. As soon as I click in that sheet, and let's just say that I want to repeat what I have in this little spreadsheet for another day, another time, another year, that it automatically will start showing that header. Now, as I scroll down, and let me in fact just click in the header and go to header and footer contextual tab and go to footer because it's just easier to see that way. As soon as I come down to what would be page 2 vertically, and again, I start typing, notice how that header and footer, if I scroll far enough, will start to appear. Well, let me go back up to the top and click in the header and go to our header footer group, because in the options we can decide to have the first page different from the other pages. Now, it might be that we would not put in a page number on the first page. We might leave, say, the workbook name off on the first page. So we have some options with what we do on that first page. Now, different odd and even pages is really kind of interesting. As soon as I click in different odd and even pages, and I then click on this first page, this first header, you can see that it even says that it's an odd page header. When I come here, it says this is an even page header. So I could put something in totally different here that then would carry through, so the odd pages would have this information, even pages would have this information. Depends on how very complex your spreadsheet is. Scale with documents simply means that, especially with a large Excel spreadsheet, you might not print it at 100%, but you might print it at, say, 70% to compress as much information as you can on a page. And you certainly want your headers and footers to scale with the rest of that document. And then align with page margins simply means that you're going to make sure that what is in the headers and footers doesn't go over the page margins so that you have headers and footers that are actually hiding some of your information on your sheets. So it's really kind of sophisticated and really nice what you can do with headers and footers. Now, here is what is just sort of amazing. When I go back to view, and I need to kind of click in my worksheet and then go back to normal, I cannot see a header or a footer or a page number. However, if I go to File and Print, and I look at my print preview on the right, I can now see this header and footer for page 1. And when I go to page 2, I can see the header and the footer for page 2. So just remember, normal view, I can't see anything, but if I go to either page layout or print preview, then I can see how the headers and the footers are going to work with my spreadsheet. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, LinkedIn Learning, Learning Express Library, and Udemy Business. We also premiere 2 new videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel. From there, be sure to look for our MCPL Consumer Technology Resources playlist, which contains all of our tech videos.